Good morning, everybody. This is Carolyn Cook. I'm a senior environmental scientist in CDFA's Office of Environmental Farming and Innovation. I want to thank you and welcome you to our program this morning. We're very excited to talk to you about a project that we've been working on over the last year, dealing with climate change and climate change adaptation, specifically for Southern California agriculture. We've had a great partner in this project with the Climate Science Alliance, and so you're going to also hear from them today. My colleague Michael Wolf is here as a co-host, and Michael, would you briefly introduce yourself?
Hi, this is Michael Wolf. I work in the Office of Environmental Farming and Innovation along with Carolyn. I'm a soil scientist originally, and here at the CDFA, I specialize in mitigation and adaptation to climate change. That gives me a chance to contribute to several of our incentive programs and to participate in state planning efforts like the Climate Change Scoping Plan and in interesting efforts like this one. Thank you for coming.
Okay, great. Thank you, Michael. I'm going to share just a brief outline of what we're going to talk about today and who's participating. So first up, I'll give a little bit of background on the Climate Change Consortium and how this project got started and some history here at CDFA with it. And then we're going to hear from Connor McGee. He's a project lead with the Climate Science Alliance, and they were, of course, a very important partner for us in this recent effort in Southern California. Connor McGee is the Alliance's lead for natural and working lands, and he's going to talk specifically about the process and outcomes that they use to solicit feedback on climate change adaptation from Southern California farmers and agricultural representatives. And then we do have a panel of experts in climate change adaptation. Michael will give a little bit of background on recent climate observations and projections. He'll share some resources that are helpful, and we'll of course be focusing on Southern California there. And we also have then Dr. Tapan Pathak. He's going to give examples of how we see climate change impacting agricultural production. And then Christian Salgado and Shulamit Schroeder are two community education specialists from cooperative extension offices in Southern California. They're going to give us an idea of how they're seeing farmers take action on climate change. So before we get into the background material, I do want to let you know that we'll have time for questions for our presenters after all of them have spoken. If you have a question, you can type it into the question box that's part of the GoToWebinar platform, and then we will read out your question during that question and answer period. So one thing, if you have a question, early on, go ahead and type it in there so that it's waiting for us when we get to that period. And I also wanted to let you know we are recording this webinar. We do plan to post it for others to view in case they weren't able to attend today. And then last sort of logistical thing, if you would definitely keep your interaction with us to the question box, that would be helpful. Please don't use the chat box or the chat function because it's very difficult for us to monitor both of those at the same time. Okay, so here's a little bit of history on the Climate Change Consortium. In 2012, our secretary, CDFA Secretary Karen Ross, convened a group of agricultural representatives from California's top 10 specialty crops. The purpose of this group was to consider how climate change was likely to impact California agriculture and to make recommendations to CDFA on how growers could adapt to the changing climate and what CDFA could do to help that adaptation along. The group met 4 times for a total of 8 days to hear from climatologists and agricultural experts and to deliberate any recommendations for our organization. A comprehensive report was completed in 2013, and it gave CDFA a total of 25 recommendations. Some of them have more details and some of them are broad. But those recommendations fall within 4 categories: research needs, planning and resource optimization, outreach and education, and technology and innovation. The recommendations included, here's some examples, providing grower technical assistance, engaging with international partners to share information on climate adaptation, supporting economic and environmental studies on the costs, benefits, and risks posed to California's diverse crops, and coordinating with partners on crop breeding and other research topics. So if you're interested in going back and reviewing that effort from 2012, you can find that on our webpage, and that webpage is listed here on the slide. In the years following the Climate Change Consortium effort, we took full advantage of the insightful recommendations. We've been fortunate to be able to take action on a number of them. Probably most notably, a new office was formed in CDFA called the Office of Environmental Farming and Innovation, and it houses several incentive programs that provide grant funding to farmers for climate-smart agricultural practices. These are practices that both reduce greenhouse gas emissions of a farm, but also build adaptive capacity for that farm. The funding of technical assistance has also become integrated into the climate-smart agriculture programs, and as part of the programs, we've worked with partners to create tools that allow farmers to evaluate the benefits of different practices, such as irrigation management, composting, cover cropping, and others too. So since 2013, CDFA has also had the opportunity to enter into relationships with some of the agricultural powerhouses around the world, such as Israel, the Netherlands, South Africa, and Australia, to understand how these regions are managing resource changes due to climate change. We've taken the opportunities provided by state and federal planning processes to evaluate the recommendations, elevate those recommendations of the consortium, and bring issues to the agencies that work and support advancement in this arena. So we're very proud of all the activities that really came out of the consortium's recommendations. And after several years of working through those recommendations, we gathered the same group again in 2016. We wanted to share our progress and to get their feedback on how we'd done so far. We came away from that meeting with another great recommendation, which was to take the same process of sharing climate science with farmers and getting feedback in various regions of the state. Because California is so diverse, the regions of California have very different agricultural crops and production systems. So we really appreciated that recommendation. So in 2019, with funding from the Special Crop Block Grant Program, we were able to enter into a partnership with the Climate Science Alliance to work on a Southern California iteration of the consortium. The Alliance, which is stationed in San Diego, works throughout the region to communicate climate science and to build partnerships with an eye toward increasing resiliency to climate change. So with this effort that we've been working on over the last year, we hope to better understand the unique situation that Southern California agriculture faces. The region is extremely diverse and different from Central and Northern California in both climate and agricultural production. Climate change is manifesting differently in this region, and there's plenty for us to learn by elevating the voices of those producers. So with that background, I'm going to share with you some slides from Connor McGee. He's with the Climate Science Alliance. He'll be describing the process that they use to gather input and to summarize some of what we learned. We had some difficulties with our webinar on Monday with Connor's audio and connection. So we actually recorded his presentation, so I need to go to the video here. Bear with me as I switch the screens a bit. Okay, before I start the video, I want to share a little background about Connor. Connor grew up in the rich ecosystem of his Southern California tribal community and has made it a mission to advocate for the important relationships and responsibilities associated with Southern California natural and working lands. Connor works closely with scientists, managers, agricultural partners, tribal representatives, and other partners to support climate-smart food systems and climate mitigation strategies within ecosystem stewardship. His professional background encompasses work with various stakeholders to establish and expand innovative alliances to accelerate effective problem solving among resource managers, scientists, and decision makers. So I'm gonna play for you now a video recording of Connor's slides.
Yuyang, my name is Connor McGee. Research and Data Applications Manager at the Climate Science Alliance. I'll be working you through this presentation today on our climate change consortium report that we've been working on over the past year in partnership with the CDFA. Starting with the geographic scope of our project, we were focusing on South San Joaquin Valley, Kern County, Riverside, Imperial counties, and inland deserts, and San Diego County. Our outreach and engagement was done in a variety of different methods. In-person workshops were held. We had discussion sections. We did one-on-one interviews and case studies with farmers that we did follow-ups with after our initial interviews. And then due to COVID, we transitioned to making more phone calls, doing online surveys, and mail-in surveys, mainly in the Kern and South San Joaquin. So we did our outreach to 150 individuals. We had 50 individuals participating. And oh, I apologize for this slide here. We had 30% are producers, and you can see that in the green of our pie chart here. 30% were representatives, 21% were technical assistant specialists, and 19% were researchers. So again, the regions that we had targeted our outreach in, almost all of our participants are specialty crop producers, which is very common in the Southern California region. There's a lot of small scale farmers, mom and pop shops, small shareholder farms. And then when we worked our way up the state, so there were some larger producers that we're able to engage with. Almost all of these operations in San Diego County are organic. There are conventional farms and nursery producers. And it goes across the board from the experience level of producers that we were speaking with, which was great to get feedback from folks coming into the profession and long experienced folks that were able to share all of their valuable knowledge. The way we went about soliciting feedback in teasing out all of these important topics were based around asking all of these questions about the needs and priorities surrounding climate change and how they're seeing these impacts on their farm, both current challenges, and how they see moving into the future and what their needs are and how they'd like to strategize moving into the future. And of course, all of the impacts that climate change is having on producers in the area, specifically Southern California. Luckily, we were able to scale down a lot of this data due to the fourth climate assessment and prior reports. We were able to really focus on areas and have good data to stand on. And that was one of our strengths in this report. Of course, these impacts hit all of these areas, soil and water resources, extreme heat events, the precipitation and temperature regimes that are changing, impact all these things. And then of course, those bottom line costs of having to transition and respond to climate change events. Farmers are at the forefront of all of these extremes, and we heard that in our feedback. A lot of the challenges that are faced during climate change, farmers experience firsthand on a daily basis, and they are called to adapt, called to make changes, to make adjustments in light of all of these extremes. One of the great things that we found out throughout this past year of engagement was a lot of farmers are doing these practices and strategies to be more resilient in their farming and cover cropping, reduce tillage, applications of biochar mulch, increasing their soil organic carbon, many different methods of silvopasture. It was really great to hear that these practices were already put in place. There was already trials set up on many farms. Farmers are really talking about this and trying to find ways that they could scale these practices. Of course, all of the changes that climate change is brought to the region, extreme events, the changes in temperature, the evapotranspiration rates that are affected and affecting the bottom line of water costs and being able to use X amount of water given restrictions that are being implemented. And so these challenges are definitely scaling. So a lot of on the farm practices that are recommended is how can farmers enhance their water efficiency and retention in the soil? What methods are coming out where they could develop the soil, enrich the soil more, and use more regenerative approaches? And so that was definitely one of the things that was at the forefront of our feedback. Understanding the feasibility of all of this. What does it mean to take these practices to implementation? What is the absolute cost? How could that funding make its way down the line so that these practices are seen through the duration of their implementation? And incentive programs that are in place are challenging, and they have limitations due to the capital investment that needs to be made on the front end. And a lot of the feedback that we received was, how do these work? How do we do it in this specific scenario, in this specific geographic location, given the constraints? Farmers were really looking to have that information in hand and also have the support to start these practices rather than an incentive payment down the road. Technology making it to the agricultural sites was another recommendation and opportunity that we recognized. Water sensor technology, remote water moisture monitoring, of course, being able to aggregate in the most efficient way possible with the technology in hand to conserve water. Having this technology on site was something that really stood out as a need for the producers. And then adapting and having cropping systems that are suited for the Southern California environment. Some of these regions are in the Imperial County where we're in low deserts, high deserts, Mediterranean systems, alpine systems. All this diverse landscape requires to have various technology to make more informed decisions. There's no large swathing answers for a lot of these questions, so they need to be location specific. Education, outreach, and technical assistance. Having resource hubs was across the board something that farmers were asking for. Where to fill the gaps in technical assistance in their region, depending on the county they're in, and having more on-the-farm research support. You know that the best thing to do for their operation is to test and demonstrate on their site, and having support to do that, having researchers being able to support them in doing that as they embark on trying to have the best on the site research. Again, being able to have that applied research and translate to scale the research findings. Being able to have that regional specific context, as I was discussing on the previous slide. Again, downscaling the science, downscaling the research so that the microclimates that these producers are farming in are downscaled so that they have accurate information for their specific location. And What does this mean for workers as well? The health impacts of these extreme events and the changing precipitation and temperatures in these specific environments, and how that is affecting their workers is information that needs to be on hand for these diverse farming operations. Measuring soil organic carbon, and again, being able to have those remote soil moisture monitoring sensors on site. The discussions around carbon and farmers considering having their sites be placed for serving the dual purpose for sequestering carbon, being able to quantify that carbon and having accurate measuring and accounting done on that carbon, and how they can make better informed decisions on what practices used to sequester carbon at their specific operation. Was something we got robust feedback on. With all of the incentive programs that seem to be coming down the road, they want to be able to make the best decisions surrounding soil organic carbon. So the research needs and priorities, of course, how to transition to more resilient crops. Understanding how these extremes are impacting their region, and being able to look further down the road and decide on what tests to set up to transition crops. And as a lot of pests are expanding their range due to the changing temperature and precipitation regimes, how could we best prepare for that? Where's the research on that for their specific agricultural production? The economic analysis, again, the cost-benefit analysis for implementing all of these different strategies and techniques. What are the absolute costs, so that farmers are able to understand whether or not it is appropriate and suitable for them to embark on these endeavors. And then, designing grant funding that reflects that true cost is something that is definitely a need and a priority for these practices being implemented across the board to the agricultural community. And again, on the farm research, farmers are looking for more demonstration on their farms, more research support on their farms, so that they're able to have the best data that they need to make these informed decisions on their site, what they need to do, what actions need to be taken to have a more resilient agricultural site. All of these things were really at the forefront, more on the farm research projects. And again, farming at extremes, who's at the forefront of this? Farmers are. They have to adapt. They're at the front lines of all of these changes in climate. They feel it on a daily basis. They see the effects of the changes in temperature and precipitation, and they feel that they're part of the solution, that they're at the forefront, and they're going to be able to have the means and encouragement to adapt, to adjust, and to make changes and build more resilient systems. And the sentiment that we got from that was very, very emboldened in doing that and taking that on. Collaborations, we heard it over and over again, that the willingness and need to have more collaborators supporting all of these efforts, and feeling a stronger connection to the researchers and technical assistance specialists and farmers, having that relationship strengthened, and having research hubs, again, knowing where to go, and having support when new challenges arise was definitely a strength that we found in this report. I'd like to share with you these summary guides. If you could see at the bottom are links where we're able to highlight some of the key takeaways. And of course, there's the draft summary that you could visit as well. And then the report in its entirety, we share a lot of the stories of the producers that we met with, They share their family history and how they came into farming and why this is so important to them. And you can see that in our case study stories. And of course, all of our citations, in our reporting, if you'd like to visit our final report. And yes, this was done in collaboration with our partners. CDFA and Climate Science Alliance were able to produce this final report, which we're very proud of, this joint effort. And please visit our website and see more of what we're doing at the Climate Science Alliance. You can see our relationships at the Resilient Roots Initiative with local farmers and producers and researchers. And you can see our case study stories with the farmers that we work with throughout producing this report at our website as well. And we also have the Carbon Sink demonstration project at the Palma Tribal Farms, where we're transitioning polyculture farm into a cover cropping organic olive orchard, hedgerows, windbreaks, biochar, compost applications, our soil moisture monitoring technology that we just put in at the farm. And we're taking our soil measurements, what aggregate stability tests at our demonstration farm. And we also have our climate kits. You can see all of our engagement in the community and youth and the educational outreach that we're doing. And we're just so proud of the relationships that we're able to build with growers, technical assistance specialists, researchers, and various representatives that came in this collaborative effort, spent so much time with us, getting their detailed feedback into this report. So thank you. Here's some more links, and yes, thank you.
Okay, thanks to Connor for putting that presentation together. This is Michael Wolf speaking from the CDFA. I'm going to spend a few minutes now talking about the basic climate trends in the past and the future. We'll wait just a second while Carolyn gets the slides up. Okay, here we go. We're going to rely for our slides on climate today on some resources that are readily available to the public, so you can see what those tools can do for you. So two main resources that the state presents to help the public understand climate predictions at a state and especially at a local level are CalAdapt and the 4th Regional Climate Assessments. CalAdapt is put together by the California Energy Commission, and it has a number of indicators that are relevant to climate change. Mainly for the agricultural community, you would be interested in the temperature and precipitation maps and the local graphics of the patterns and of their, in general, and of their extremes. You can put your location physically into the tool, and it automatically produces graphics projecting your future, or your multiple futures, we should say, because it shows lines from a number of different computer models. So that's a very interesting site to visit for everyone to look at their particular case. Then there are the regional climate assessments, which are documents which recently put together in recent years, which you can download, where really the most regionally relevant climatological changes are discussed per region. So again, I would certainly recommend that you read the report that corresponds to your region. And then the third source that we're listing here is what you'll see on the next slide, the Berkeley Earth Temperatures website. According to choosing a major city near you, basically, it's easy to get top quality records of temperature over time, which have been reconstructed for the more distant past, going back to 1840. Again, an interesting place to visit, and all the links here are ready for you to note or click on in the future. We can go to the next slide. Okay. So here we have some graphics that you can obtain on that Berkeley Earth Temperatures website to put us in historical perspective about temperature changes over time, pretty much up to the present moment. This is a combination of recent weather station data and inferences from the more distant past, as I mentioned, going back to 1840. The cities I picked to represent our three focus areas were Bakersfield in the southern San Joaquin Valley. Then for the Imperial Valley in the Inland Deserts region, Mexicali was actually the closest fit. And then San Diego itself, of course, had a good temperature location to fix on there. Of course, temperatures have been shooting up since the early 70s, though you might have trouble seeing the axes down there. That's when the major industrial greenhouse gas emissions were not so much taking off. They had already been in effect, but they were starting to really make themselves felt after some lag time. Of course, you can see some quite similar trends over time in these locations. They're not vastly different. The scales of change are similar between the two inland valleys, though of about 1.5 degrees average increase in temperature, whereas in San Diego it was a little bit more than half of that, a little bit more than half that change over the same time, because it's moderated by the proximity to the ocean. All right, so we can move ahead to talking about climate predictions. Tapan will speak more in more depth about changes in precipitation. Overall, it's interesting to look at a map that we were able to download from CalAdapt, which shows a real north-south divide in California between those areas which are predicted to have slightly more precipitation overall, and those areas with slightly less, which is to say the southern half of the state. And much of the way up through the San Joaquin Valley, of course. This depends, of course, these projections depend upon the emissions scenarios that we're choosing, whether we expect high or low or something in between for greenhouse gas emissions up to the future. However, the high and low scenarios that the state has been using don't differ much up to 2050, because they really differ according to what path we're able to take starting from 2040 onwards, for example. So we suppose that a high emission scenario up to 2050 serves as a good useful point for planning from an agriculturalist's perspective. Here you'll see in this map that the borders of the 4th regional climate assessments are shown to give you an idea of the overlap with that project. Okay, so we can move along to see a similar map of temperature changes. Temperature changes are not equivocal anymore. They are expected to be quite consequential throughout most of the state. Of course, they're mildest in the coastal areas, and heaviest the further you go inland. The greatest changes, yes, are in Southern California and in the Sierra regions. Tapan will talk in more detail about a related issue, which is not just the increase in average temperatures, but the increase in the number of extreme heat days. Here, for example, going by information that you can derive from CalAdapt, we would see that the 7 hottest days of the year in current times will occur 30 times a year in the South San Joaquin Valley around 2050. They'll occur around 25 times a year in the Imperial Valley, and they'll occur probably more than 20 times per year for San Diego. And those numbers, furthermore, would at least double by 2100 if we continue under a high greenhouse gas emission level. It's also worth noting, whenever we talk about temperatures, that the droughts will be hotter than the average temperatures. All right, so we can move ahead. Okay, here's a very relevant graphic for the whole state, which was in the 4th climate change assessment for the San Diego region. Let's take a close look at what it indicates. It was published in 2018, but it includes back model data for the 2 emission scenarios, which don't, as you see, diverge very much until recent years. Fundamentally, there's going to be an increased likelihood of drought, which is related to an increase in variability of climate. Let's take a moment to understand it because the message is simple, but the details are a little bit hard to process at first sight. So these two lines, sets of lines, show the percentage of years that will be dry at 2 thresholds. When we see the higher line, that's the 20th percentile. That really means that out of 30 years in a 30-year window, the 6 wettest years would be the 20th percentile. So that's why it begins around 1965 at the level of 6. And the same logic goes for the 5th percentile, which is the worst year out of every 20 years on average, as it was in 1960. So that correlates to about 1.75 out of a 30-year window. So the fundamental lesson that we get from here is that the likelihood of having what would have been a 1 in 5 dry year in 1960 goes up to about 1 in 3 years by 2080. And as for the most severe dry years, which used to be 1 in 20 years, which are really, of course, have deep impacts on agriculture and on the following years, those would go up importantly as well to where we'd be expecting, let's see, 3 or 4 of those years per 30, rather than 1 out of 20. These outcomes are expected to depend a lot on emissions levels, of course. So we can move on to another slide. And the last impression we just wanted to leave you with is that although there is possibility for precipitation to swing different ways in different years, and we understand that it will be more variable, we do also already see and expect to continue with wetter winters and drier springs. The winter effects are not so strong in Southern California, but the drier springs certainly are. So that was just a quick overview of some climate changes that we expect to see, and we'll be hearing more about them now from Dr. Tapan Pathak. He's a cooperative extension specialist with UCANR based at UC Merced. He's an agricultural engineer by training and has years of experience working in applied climate science and areas of agriculture. He has a statewide appointment and is involved in various state, regional, and international projects related to climate change and agriculture. Thank you for being with us, Tapan.
Good morning, everyone. First, I would like to thank CDFA and Climate Science Alliance for allowing me to contribute to this very important and interesting collaborative effort. I was able to contribute to the San Diego focus group, and it was a very interesting and learning experience, and learning from stakeholders about this impacts was really useful. So so today I'm going to give a very broad, big picture overview of climate change and how climate change is impacting agriculture, and some specific examples for Southern California. Next, please. So here's a brief outline. Just one slide about the California agriculture facts, and briefly go over the projected and observed trends. Michael covered it pretty well, and so I'll just provide a brief synopsis of what we are going to experience or expect in terms of temperature, precipitation, extremes, and snowpack, but then more specifically talk about agricultural impacts related to yield, chill accumulations, growing season shifts, and how it may impact pest and disease pressures. I will also mention about one project that we are getting started on uh, related to decision, crop specific, region specific decision support system, and summary and the key research directions. Next, please. Yeah, so I don't want to get into the details about California agriculture, but what I wanted to make a point here is California agriculture is a global leader in a lot of fruits and vegetable production. So impacts of climate change that we are going to experience in California is not just specific to California, but it's going to impact agriculture for the nation and at the international level as well. We have a pretty limited land in terms of the irrigation, only about 9 million acres of irrigated land, and with that land, we are able to produce so many of the specialty crops and brings a lot of the value to the state, and so that's pretty impressive. But the impacts of climate change is concerning to the state. Next, please. So talking about temperature, Michael mentioned about increase in the temperature trends at the average level. And in this slide, I'm going to dive more into and talk about specific to the minimum and maximum temperature increases. So if you focus on South Coast in this region, as you can see from this bar chart, rate of increase in the minimum temperatures is substantially higher than the maximum temperature. And so that trend is kind of consistent across different climate zones in California. But more specifically for South Coast, minimum temperature increases is the highest in is compared to other zones and regions. Similar to San Joaquin and Sacramento Delta region, that comes next in terms of the minimum temperatures. So on an average, minimum temperatures in last 100 years have increased at the rate of 2.5 to 3.5 degrees Fahrenheit for the whole previous century, and not so much in terms of the maximum temperatures. So that is, and there are many negative consequences related to this minimum temperature increases. Focus on Sierra region, rate of increase in the maximum temperatures is quite low, but the minimum temperatures is almost more than a double for that region, and that, you know, as we know, the snowpack is a natural water storage. There is a lot of consequences related to the minimum temperature increases in the Sierras in that regards. Next, please. So Michael also talked about precipitation trends, and there was a dry and wet kind of zoning when you compare Northern California to Southern California. This is very location specific time series. So two Northern California, one Southern California region. What you see here is a lot of fluctuations in terms of the precipitation in historical and the future climate, I mean future time zones, but not too much in terms of the trend. So we are not really seeing any particular trend in terms of the drier extreme of the weather extremes. What we see is a variability in both extremes. So that variability is going to expand further into as we move into the future. Another important point, so climate modelers have more confidence in saying that for California, the entire wet season is going to shrink further, and so amount of rain that we are going to get, it from fewer but more intense precipitation events. So for the future, California is going to be vulnerable to both flood as well as drought conditions. Next, please. So if we categorize temperature and precipitation into 4 categories: dry, hot, wet, cold, wet, hot, dry, cold, and wet, cold, most of the recent years, and more specifically from 1970, 1980 onwards, most of the years are in either dry, hot, or wet, hot category. So in general, the temperature is hotter. But given that we had this recent drought, exceptional drought in California, many of those recent years are in the dry, hot category. Next, please. So Michael also talked about extreme heat days, and so I pulled again from the same source that Michael was talking about, CalAdapt, and this one is for San Diego, and what it shows is that extreme heat days, which is defined as a 98th percentile in terms of the temperature ranges for a period that is defined. So in this one, it's defined from 1980 to 2005, and you can basically define your own range by sliding this bar on the tool itself. But just to make a point, so if you in the historical years, on an average, there were 4 days when temperature was exceeding that threshold value, and I believe for San Diego the threshold is probably about 90 degrees. I don't say it here, but so then extreme hot days are on an average 4. As we move into the future, and more specifically for higher emission scenario, we are expected to get 3 weeks where temperature is exceeding that threshold. So the extreme heat conditions are going to be even worse as we move into the future. Next, please. And not just specific the number of days, but also the timing. So as you can see, most of the historical years, those extreme hot days are scattered in a very lighter situation. But as we move into the future, extreme hot conditions are more dense in the August through October timeframe for San Diego region. But important thing to notice is that extreme heat conditions are going to start as soon as April and last as long as November. And so when you compare, when you think about impact, so there's obviously impact on crop productivity, but also the farm workers' health is another big issue, especially for the Southern California, many parts of the Southern California, and extreme heat days, which is distributed across the year. It's also concerning for agriculture. Next, please. So I've talked very briefly about the temperatures in the Sierras, and snowpack is our natural water storage. If we compare it with the historical range 1960 to 1990, and they're both low and high emission scenario, we are going to see either 48 to 65% loss in terms of the snowpack. And this is again depending on which model that we are using. There is a lot of uncertainty, but on an average, we are going to see reduced snowpack as we move into the future. Next, please. So we talked about very briefly about the changes in temperature, precipitation, extremes, and snowpack, etc. The next half is I'll dive more into and talk about impacts, consequent impacts on agriculture. Next, please. So I briefly want to mention about a paper that we published a couple of years ago, which is kind of a very detailed review of climate change trends and impacts on California agriculture. So it's an open source. Feel free to download it if you want to get more detailed information about California. And we sort of try to distill good information from a lot of reports, including the previous CDFA specialty crop report on climate change. And so there's a lot of good information in this paper. Next, please. So when we think about impacts on yield, many of those crops, there is not very well defined crop simulation models, but in this one, there are models that's been calibrated for a few of those crops. And so if you think about impacts, depending on which crop we pick, the impact of climate change on yield. So we can expect a reduction in yield anywhere from 9% to 29%. Again, this is just a reference number because this is very generic to the management practice of the crop varieties used. And then this is only looking at the impacts of temperature. In this condition, they haven't looked at the water stress situation, which is going to be more and more normal in California as we go into the future because of the water uncertainty, and water stress might have another negative consequence on these numbers. Another important thing is that this brings an important issue of adaptation, and so this new report talked a lot about those adaptation practices and making agriculture more resilient to climate risk. So I think those points are going to be very crucial, and adaptation is going to be very important for many of those crops. Next, please. So for many specialty crops, they do require certain amount of chill accumulation during the winter time frame and to break their dormancy and start the blooming process. So with the increase in the minimum temperatures, chill accumulation is going to be an issue into the future. So if there are crops that do require high number of chill accumulations, those are going to be vulnerable to climate change impacts. This is an example for the valley where they looked at, there was a paper from Ludling in 2009 where they compared 1950 chill accumulations to the future. And as you can see, you might expect 40 to 50% reduction in amount of chill accumulated compared to 1950 ranges. And so there are many varieties that's being tested for low chill accumulations, and those type of adaptation might be important as we move to the future. Next, please. The length of the growing season is time from last spring freeze to first frost, fall freeze, and so that entire time frame is increasing for Southwest in general, but more specifically for California. And so we are going to expect almost 3 more weeks with the frost-free season. That's a state average, but depending on the location, these numbers are different. Next, please. And so not to confuse the length of the growing season with the time from emergence to maturity for many of those annual crops. So in this one, we did a study a couple of years ago for many parts of the valley where we looked at processing tomato phenology, so time from emergence to maturity for processing tomatoes. And what we found is that the time frame is going to shrink almost by 2 to 3 weeks as we move into the future. The reason is that with temperature, you are going to accumulate heat units much faster rate. And with the heat units have direct relationship with the crop stages. And so we are going to see maturity much faster. Another thing that we did not see in that, did not study in that paper, but it's important, is if the time frame from emergence to maturity is shrinking, that might have negative consequences on yield. But that is something we didn't study in that paper, but that could be a potential problem. Next, please. So maybe one positive aspect I would say about climate change is that many parts of California is going to experience less and less frost risk. So as you know, frost is a big concern for certain crops that are very sensitive, for example, citrus or avocados. And so for many of those high value specialty crops, frost risk is going to be less and less of a concern for many parts. In this one, Lauren Parker at UC Davis, she is working with me and Steve Ostoyan, and we are trying to quantify the frost risk as we move into the future. And what we found is that for many parts, the areas that were frost prone in the past maybe are going to be more accessible for expanding agricultural region to those areas. And this is an example from Ventura and San Diego County. As you can see, most of the red conditions show that there is a less and less frost in the future. Next, please. There is a potential impact on weed, pests, and diseases. So we looked at the Neville orange worm, which is one of the major insect for nut crops in California. If you compare to the 2005 level, by 2100, the entire new generation of Neville orange worm is going to be visible for the entire valley, which is going to be a big concern, especially if that coincides with the harvest and the maturity time frame. So that is with the temperature increases, weed, pest, and disease pressure is going to be a very big concern, and we growers are already experiencing, and you might have you will see that in this specialty crop report as well. It's many times it's been mentioned about the pest and disease pressures. Next, please. So there is a lot of good information in this report, and I just pulled a few quotes from growers, and that kind of resonates well with the type of or the research direction we should be taking when it comes to making agriculture more resilient to climate risk. I'm going to read just a few of those quotes. So we need better tools to measure the effectiveness of these practices and better tools to implement these practices. There is a need for applied research to translate large-scale research findings into regionally specific context. It is confusing to figure out what to do to address specific issues for specific crops. So, there's a lot of comment about making those resources or research more crop specific, region specific, and more practical for growers to use. Next, please. So with that, that I was happy to see those put up comment, because that validates on some of the things that I have been working on. So I have this. I want to mention about this collaborative project with the USDA Climate Hub. It's called cadillacclimate, where we are trying to build a web-based decision support system where we wanted to translate raw climate and weather information into meaningful decision support system that is more crop specific, region specific, and that growers can use to make both short and long-term decisions. We are started to work on it, and we should be having some of those tools ready by next year or later this year. Next, please. And so this is my last slide. So this is, I saw it in previous slide as well, that a lot of this research needs resonate well with what's in the report as well. So first thing I want to mention is, there is going to be an impact of extreme heat conditions or extreme conditions. But we don't know how it is going to impact specific crops. So we need to enhance our understanding and quantify agricultural impacts related to these extremes. And if we have that information, we can provide viable adaptation strategies. We talk about models a lot, but many times models are not well prepared to do this kind of study. So we need to do a better job parameterizing models and getting those models ready so that we can do meaningful scenario-based analyses. Not to mention that we need cross-specific, region-specific framework, and we need to be holistic in terms of what we think. So it's not just the agronomy side, but we also need to take into account economics and social science aspect, and so kind of trying to build this more holistic approach. And last point is the most important one, is that providing this information or facts is not enough. We have to start working with the stakeholders, working with growers, similar to what CDFA and Climate Science Alliance has done in this report, to understand their needs and work with the clientele to make those research more useful to the community. Next, please. Yeah, so thanks for listening to my talk, and then here's my contact information. If you have any questions, feel free to approach me. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tapan. That was quite informative and interesting. I'm sure that some people will have questions about what you discussed. Please note that we'll be fielding those questions at the end of the panel, which has 2 more speakers coming up. But you can enter those questions in as we go, if you like, by clicking the simple blue horizontal tab that says questions. So that will expand to a field where you can enter in questions. All right. Next on our panel, we are fortunate to have Christian Salgado and Shulamit Schroeder. They work as community education specialists for the University of California Cooperative Extension in our target areas, along with Esther Mosase, who does the same role in San Diego and was not able to be with us. Now, Christian Salgado is the community education specialist for serving Imperial County. She provides technical assistance to farmers and ranchers in the area of voluntary implementation of climate smart agriculture. She earned a Master of Arts degree in social science as part of an interdisciplinary program called Environment and the Community at Humboldt State University. Then we'll be hearing from Shulamit Schroeder, who is a community education specialist based out of Kern County. She's a native of Maryland who graduated from the University of Maryland with degrees in Spanish and environmental science and policy, and served 2 years with the Peace Corps in Senegal. So Christian and Shulamit, thanks for being with us.
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you for the introduction, Michael, and for including the UCNR Climate Smart Ag program in these webinars. My name is Christian Salgado, as was already mentioned, and I'll be presenting the first half of this morning's presentation, along with Shulamit, that will be presenting the second half of the presentation. Our presentation today is titled Building on the Ground Resilience, Tools, Resources, and Opportunities. We are 2 of 10 community education specialists statewide that will be providing technical assistance to farmers and ranchers interested in implementing climate smart agriculture. Our goal is to encourage science-based climate smart farming and ranching practices and provide assistance when applying for grants. This program came about between a partnership with the California Department of Food and Agriculture and the University of California Cooperative Extension, and really allowed for a statewide on-the-ground implementation of how we can be assisting farmers and ranchers. I also would like to mention that it is funded by the California Climate Investment Dollars through the Strategic Growth Council. Next slide. So what is climate smart agriculture? Climate smart agriculture provides a framework for balancing multiple dimensions of agriculture and food systems in an era of climate change. There are 3 main pillars to climate smart agriculture. There is addressing agriculture's contribution to global greenhouse gas emissions, the vulnerabilities to climate change impacts, and the relationship between agricultural productivity, incomes, and food security. Sometimes these 3 objectives are referred to as the triple win. We often like to hope that climate smart ag will allow us to accomplish all 3. However, we understand as technical assistants, growers, and academics, agriculture is complex, and often there are trade-offs between these three objectives. In California, the Climate Smart Ag policy framework spans regulatory measures, incentive programs, which I'll speak to in length today, because that is the focus of our Climate Smart Ag program, as well as technological development that is both climate specific and arising from other simultaneous environmental and economic priorities. Next slide. So how did this program come about? I would like to provide you with a little bit of background. The California Secretary of Agriculture, Karen Ross, and the University of California Agriculture and Natural Resources Vice President, Glenda Himston, signed a moratorium of understanding, memorandum of understanding in Sacramento in October 26, 2018, and this initiated the Climate Smart practice. This partnership will provided $1.1 million to hire 10 cooperative extension community education specialists that were spaced out all throughout California. We reach as far north as Mendocino and Glenn County, and all the way down south where I'm located in Imperial County. In this slide, I have the list of the 3 technical assistants that work in the southern region, which is Shulami, Esther, and myself. And what's amazing about this program is we're really spaced out all throughout California. So we're able to share insights on all the different types of agriculture and how climate change is impacting those areas. Next slide. As you might already be aware of, the California Department of Food and Agriculture's Office of Environmental Farming Innovation offers a handful of programs that provides financial assistance in the form of grants. They focus on implementing on-farm solutions to improve soil health, nutrition management, irrigation management, on-farm composting, and manure management. Smart farming practices that reduce greenhouse gas emissions into the atmosphere. I will not go into details of these programs, but I do encourage attendees to reach out to myself or Shulami if you're in the southern areas of California, and would be more than happy to walk you through all of these grants in detail and provide you with assistance if in the future you would like to apply for them. So just to go over them very broadly, we have the State Water Efficiency and Enhancement Program, SWEEP for short, and that grant provides financial incentives for California agricultural operations to invest in irrigation systems that address 2 things: water conservation and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Some of the practices that farmers and ranchers can apply for are micro-irrigation, low pressure systems, and improving their energy efficiency and pump efficiency. This grant is very popular, especially in the area where I work in Imperial County. And as we continue to experience more intense periods of heat and stuff, water conservation is on the top of the list of a lot of farmers I assist. Second, we have the Healthy Soil Program, the also HSP, and that provides incentives for California growers and ranchers to sequester carbon, reduce atmospheric greenhouse gases, and improve soil health. A lot of those practices include cover cropping, compost, hedgerows, everything to build that organic matter and protect and sequester greenhouse gas emissions. This year, that grant was very popular, receiving over 500 grants, all from all different types of farming operations. And we also have the Alternative Manure Management Program, and that is AMP for short, and that funds California dairy and livestock operations for the implementation of alternative manure management practices that result in long-term methane emission reduction. So again, if you're very interested in applying for these, a lot of our work is helping farmers implement these programs on their farming operations. Next slide. So our program, outside of helping farmers apply for grants, includes many other tasks we really like to encourage and promote climate smart ag practices through several of the things I've listed here. So we do assist CDFA grant awardees. So what that means is once we've already gone through the process of helping a farmer apply for a grant and they were successful and awarded, we continue that relationship with them and continue helping them, whether it is kind of explaining to them what the reimbursement process is, or making sure that they have the technical assistance they need to implement the project on their farm. So this means that a lot of these programs can last anywhere from 3 to 5 years, so these relationships continue on for a very long time. We also support and we are supported by the advisors within our cooperative extensions where we work, and we often assist in research. So it's also very important to connect farmers with the best research and information that we have at the cooperative extension. I've hosted a handful of workshops and field days where I've invited farmers that I've worked with to apply for grants to come and visit and see our drip system, see our soil moisture monitors, and kind of get an idea of how this relates to the crop that they're growing. We also really like to stay connected across California, and a way we do that is through our blog. We post pretty regularly. We try to do a monthly one. Most of us will talk about experiences we've had with farmers, how they're implementing climate smart practices, both as part of CDFA grants and outside CDFA grants. And it's just a great way where we can share and build that community across California. And lastly, we started verifying HSP projects, which is another great way to connect farmers with CDFA by going out to those farms and making sure that we're a resource available to them. As is mentioned in the Climate Smart Change Impacts for Specialty Crops Regional Report, I just really want to echo that many of the presenters had said today and on Tuesday and on Monday, I mean, was that we really try to make everything specific and within the context of what the farmers are dealing with climate change. So in my region, a lot of farmers really want to push for energy and water efficiency. So I have a lot of conversations related to those topics and finding resources to better support them. But this varies per area. Ventura County, San Diego County, we're very different in the types of farming systems we end up assisting. So I will pass this on to Shulami, who will be presenting the second half of the presentation today and providing you with details of how these practices are being implemented in the Southern California region.
Hey, hi, I'm Shulami. I'm based in Bakersfield. I'll be talking about the ways that we've seen these climate smart practices implemented in our areas. Christian mentioned 3 programs, but I'll only be talking about Healthy Soils and SWEEP because we haven't seen very many AMP projects in our area. So for Healthy Soils in Kern and Imperial, we've seen that compost is the most popular Healthy Soils practice. It's an easy way to add nutrients and organic matter. In San Diego, Esther has seen that a popular practice is spreading mulch. It reduces plant evapotranspiration, soil erosion, and weed pressure. There's also been a good amount of interest in whole orchard recycling in Kern and Imperial counties. This is when instead of burning an old orchard or chipping and removing the old orchard, you chip the trees and then incorporate them right back into the soil where they were growing. Other practices that growers in Southern California are interested in are cover crops and hedgerows. Both of these practices can encourage beneficial insects and sequester carbon. The biggest concern that growers have with them is that they require more water or they're more expensive. SWEEP is extremely popular in Kern County. Some of the more common SWEEP projects here involve converting from flood to drip irrigation. This can reduce the amount of water needed to irrigate a crop by a substantial amount. Growers also install soil moisture monitors and other sensors to detect how much water needs to be applied per irrigation event. This can increase water use efficiency. They also like to improve or replace old pumps and install variable frequency drives. This makes the pump more energy efficient and reduces overall greenhouse gas emissions. SWEEP is the only grant program that helps growers install small solar systems to reduce their dependence on the electrical grid or diesel, thereby reducing greenhouse gas emissions. SWEEP projects can not only save money and water and energy, they also save growers a lot of money. So it's a very popular program across the state, but Kern County tends to get more projects awarded than other parts of Southern California, as I'll discuss in the next slide. So SWEEP enables growers to increase their water and energy use efficiency. This is especially important in Southern California, where there isn't a lot of water even in good years. This helps growers be more resilient in drought years. If they reduce the overall amount of water needed to keep their crops growing by improving their irrigation system, then reduced water availability during a drought won't hurt them quite as much as if they were still depending on something like flood irrigation. Another bonus to this program is that it improves air quality, which is especially important in Kern and Imperial counties. SWEEP will pay for a diesel pump to be replaced by an electric pump, and that reduces the amount of noxious gases and particulates released into the atmosphere. SWEEP is extremely competitive since farmers all over the state want to reduce their water usage and cut down on their energy bills. The program gives priorities to growers from severely overdrafted groundwater basins and from disadvantaged groups or communities. This latest round was so competitive that to get funded, you had to have those priority points. Growers in Imperial and San Diego counties have a harder time competing for SWEEP grants because they're generally not in an overdrafted basin like Kern growers often are. Another reason that San Diego and Imperial counties have a harder time getting funded is that the application requires past pumping data to establish a baseline for greenhouse gas emissions. So if you rely on surface water deliveries or municipal water for your irrigation, then you don't have that information. This makes many growers in San Diego and Imperial ineligible for the program. Kern County, on the other hand, has plenty of growers who rely on groundwater pumping and are in severely overdrafted groundwater basins, so they're more likely to get awarded. Next slide. Now I'm going to go over some of the practices that we have seen in our various areas. I'll start with San Diego. So here are some examples of the Healthy Soils projects that Esther went out to see. Photo 1 on the left top is of a Healthy Soils project that Esther verified in Campo. The grower planted a hedgerow in November 2018. They found that the plants that did the best under the harsh, cold, windy conditions were the native plants. So that's really good information for other growers in the area to know, so that if they are interested in planting a hedgerow, they should focus on planting native plants. Photo 2, the one right next to it, is of a field day for a Healthy Soils demo project in Bonsall. Demo projects incentivize growers to try out new practices and also bring other farmers onto their land to show them what the practices look like and how they work in their specific area. For this one, they applied compost on a vineyard and they learned not to put the compost in the rows as it made it more difficult to control weeds. They recommended instead to put it between the rows. And then the photo on the right on the bottom is a cover crop in Valley Center. And there they learned that the vetch that they planted for the cover crop did really well, but took over and the other cover crops in the mix. Next slide. So there have been a bunch of sweep projects in Kern County. I just don't have pictures for them, but sweep is extremely popular here. On the left, I have a picture of a hedgerow in Tulare. I think that it would be possible to plant it also, a similar hedgerow in Kern County. Hedgerows encourage beneficial insects and pollinators. And then if you plant tall bushes, they can slow down the wind, reduce erosion, and provide some shade. In the middle, I have a picture of a compost application in Kern County. It's the most popular healthy soils practice here. It provides nutrients and improves soil structure. And then the last picture I have is a cover crop, and they are getting some more interest, especially in orchard settings. They can improve water infiltration and encourage beneficial insects and pollinators. So these practices can increase resilience to some of the effects of climate change that Tapan mentioned while sequestering carbon. Next slide. So finally, I have some pictures from Imperial County. Growers are starting to use drip irrigation on some crops, and they're even doing some subsurface drip for alfalfa. They're also installing soil moisture monitors and ET stations to keep track of how much water is available to plants and how much water they need to apply to keep the plants growing. And then on the bottom left, we've got compost spreading in Holtville because compost is very popular in Imperial, just like it is in Kern. Thank you for your attention. I look forward to hearing your questions.
Thank you. Carolyn, please go ahead.
That's all right. Thanks. Thank you, Michael, and thank you to the panel. Really interesting topic, I think, to me, and Tapan, what's hitting home with me right now is sort of the need for translation, which was mentioned in the report, which is, translating the useful science about climate change and practices to the ground and decision-making tools and technical assistance to help with that. So it is time for our question and answer period. We have quite a bit of time, maybe 20 minutes or more, to have some questions for the panel. And you can type your questions into our question box in the GoToWebinar platform. Really looking forward to hear if you have any questions, and we know that takes a minute to get some in there. So I'm going to go ahead and start with a question prepared by us at CDFA, and I'll open it up to all of the panel members, but it really hits upon decision support tools. So if you're thinking about climate change impacts in Southern California specifically, which decision support tools do you think could help farmers adapt to climate change? You might talk about, the impacts of climate change you're expecting, but also what they need to know.
Sure. So, I just to give you a perspective, when it comes to data, a lot of times growers want to integrate climate and weather information into one of many decisions they have to make for their farm. So I think one of the efforts that we are working in this web-based decision support system is, first thing is there is no shortage of data, but that the format of those data is not in a format that growers want, right? And so our effort is to translate this information into some sort of a meaningful decision support system. So when we think about Southern California in general, there are many crop diversity and types of tools that we thought would be useful. That depends. I mean, so it varies from. So for first thing is I talked about increase in the heat waves. So what if growers have information about the next heat wave? If there is a heat wave coming in next 14 days on a daily basis, and not just that, but also what are the intensity of those heat. So if it is only one day with temperature exceeding 100 degrees, or is it consecutive 3 or 4 days? So that changes the risk factor. And so if they know this risk in advance, they can be better prepared for how to tackle that. And so one of our tools is going to be focused on providing this heat advisory system to growers, and that is going to be useful to many crops, and that's going to be relevant to many crops. And along with this heat, another important factor, so one of the major mitigation strategies for tackling heat conditions is applying more and more irrigation. So providing information such as how much extra water, how much extra irrigation you would need to alleviate some of those impacts related to the heat. And so that kind of information, if we can provide in a one place where they get most of the crop specific resources, that is going to be one of the efforts. And similar for the frost. I mean, I mentioned that frost is going to be less and less of a concern, but whenever there is a frost, the damages are going to be very crucial. And so if they have the frost information ahead of a time, that can also help growers manage it better. And there are many other tools that we are thinking about is for if there are annual crops, then choosing a optimum planting time or harvest time, and maybe it's a good idea to go for a longer variety versus having intercropping and things like that. So those are the efforts that we are working on, and then that's going to help a lot of both small and large scale growers in many ways. It's just a very general synopsis of how this could be useful to growers.
Thank you. I'm thinking about one of the slides that Connor had in his presentation too, and it emerged in the report from Southern California, was extreme heat, but extreme heat in combination with winds and wildfire risk. So I think that's really interesting, and
Absolutely,
perhaps, yeah, perhaps that the tool under development for extreme heat waves will.
And just to add to that, when you talked about the wind, another the consequence of wind is I was in another presentation yesterday on strawberry field days, and they mentioned about the problem with the drift, and if they wanted to have more wind velocity type of information that can help growers when to apply insecticide or fertilizers on their farm. And so those kind of things that can also help with those meteorology factors.
Yeah. Okay, well, thank you. That's great. I wanted to also offer this opportunity to Shulamit. On Monday, Christian and Shulamit both mentioned that they've worked on developing a tool for cover crop selection, and that seems like a good decision support tool that folks might use for adaptation if they want to focus on soils or focus on protecting soil. Do you want to talk a little bit about that, Shulamit?
Sure. Yeah, so I was looking at cover crops and I realized that there are some simple tools for other areas for growers or someone who's working with a grower to help figure out what would work best in their area, and that there wasn't one for California. So I decided to make one. So I've got about 40 cover crop species. And so you could fill out the conditions of your field, you know, how much water it's going to get, what area of California it's in, and then what kind of benefits you want to get out of your cover crop. So for example, if you want compaction reduction or you want more pollinators, you can put that in, and then it does some calculations and then spits out a ranking of those. So it doesn't make the mix for you. It just says, okay, well, maybe rye would be good for that area. And you can then also use that as a tool or like a stepping stone in your discussion with your seed dealer or your whoever you're working with to figure out what would work best for your area, for your spot.
Thanks, that's really great. For the last couple years, I've been lucky enough to go to some cover crop demonstration days, and it's extremely interesting when just to think about how farmers might select that combination of right crops to go in that mix. So thanks for sharing that, and also for working on the tool. So along the lines of outreach, you know, we hear a lot about how busy farmers are. You know, they're often working on the next step, the next phase, planning ahead for the next cropping season. But we also know that farmers talk to each other quite a bit. So to anybody on the panel, how can we use the networks connections among farmers to spread these adaptation practices, share about tools? Would any of you like to talk on some of those networks?
Well, that's a very good question. I think, and in, you know, I totally support that statement because I see there were a few survey where they were asking, you know, where do growers see motivation in adapting some of those practices, and many times is basically looking at you know, growers neighbors success in terms of adapting some of the practice or using some of the tools, and maybe you know, that's their motivation to start. And so maybe I would say is good to engage you know, early adapters or innovative farmers into this you know, whatever the project, whether it's a site-specific adaptation project or if it is tool building or anything that growers see value in that information, and engaging, you know, those growers who can then you know, engage with other growers, and so I think that way it's really an effective way, or one of the effective ways of outreach in that sense.
Yes, and I would also like to add something as well. I think it was Connor's presentation mentioned just these hubs of farmers that are sharing information and kind of continuing supporting them and continuing dialogue with them. So as a person who works for cooperative extension, I feel there's a role for technical assistance, and then there's a role for knowledge sharing between farmer to farmer and kind of elevating those voices. And I think an event that was really successful, and I believe it might have been mentioned, or we had a speaker, was from Solidarity Farms in San Diego County. And I feel like bringing together all these different types of stakeholders into a common space of sharing information was really successful. And even personally, I feel like sometimes I will mention things to growers and I will hear another grower mention that same comment that I gave them, but they didn't really hear it until they heard it from another farmer themselves. So I think really continuing to build those networks and supporting, especially as Tapan said, those champion farmers, those early adopters in California that have been doing cover cropping for a decade maybe, or 5+ years. So I think that's a great way to be successful in supporting these groups.
Great, thank you so much for those comments. I just thought it would be a good opportunity to share some perhaps resources for folks who want to find demonstration days, and it was occurring to me that we could talk about the Healthy Soils Program's demonstration projects that might be a good place for farmers to learn from one another. And often, you know, technical assistance organizations are involved with demonstrations. So you can always find information about those on CDFA's web pages and our email blasts. Go to your local resource conservation district or University of California Extension office to find out more about those opportunities. So another question that came in, and I think is related a little bit, is that often the co-benefits of some of these practices get just as much or more traction than maybe the climate mitigation benefits or the concept of climate adaptation, which is, you know, quite long-term as opposed to some of the immediate co-benefits. So for the farmers that you work with, do they talk about the co-benefits or surprising co-benefits that they're seeing?
Yeah, I think that for a lot of growers, the co-benefits are what is interesting to them. So like if they want to do a hedgerow, it's more because that'll bring in some beneficial insects to maybe knock down their pest pressure. And that's more important to them than sequestering carbon.
Yeah, mostly I've seen an interest, this is Christian, in the co-benefits with the organic growers in the Imperial County who have been applying compost already for some time, but they're interested in kind of adopting a new climate smart practice, and they've been, you know, playing with the idea and experimenting with cover crops in the low desert. And a lot of that has to do with wanting to, like, the pollinators. So a lot of them will do intercropping of a different species of, like, say a flower or some type of pollinator in between their let's say a leafy green or a spinach. That's a big crop here over the winter growing season. So I do see an interest in adopting those practices for the co-benefits.
Okay, thank you. I think we'll just have time for one more question. I'll direct this one to you. So we do kind of tangentially talk about increasing pressure from weeds, pests, and diseases along with climate change, but they are kind of difficult to predict, and there's so many interactions there, perhaps with things that are not directly related to climate change. So thinking about increasing pest and disease pressure, what are some of the medium and long-term goals of trying to better understand what's happening with pest changes, disease, and weeds too?
Well, sorry, was it directed to me?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, sure.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, first thing, I'm not an entomologist. I do work with those you know, experts, and I provide more of a climate perspective. But what I you know, based on their perspectives, I think one thing we know is similar to how crops respond to temperature increases. Those insects are also responding in a similar fashion. That, you know, their growth is expanding at the rapid rate. We are going to see more and more generations. So all I can say is that integrated pest management. So UC has a comprehensive list of integrated pest management practices that is specific to those insects and specific to the crops. And I think as we think about the future, and given this pest and disease pressure is going to be more and more of a concern, kind of relying on those guidelines and following those guidelines, and you know, even preparing early in the process to control those pests I think that is going to be a key issue as we move into the future, because when I talk about navel orange worm, we know that those generations are going to be more and more present into the future. But there are also many of those IPM practices, integrated pest management practices, published that you can do before the blooming starts, or before right after the harvest and before the next harvest. And so implementing those kind of practices can not completely reduce your risk, but at least you can minimize or manage those risks.
Okay, thank you very much. It sounds like, staying on top of the changing situation with pests and diseases is going to be extremely important for farmers moving forward. So I'm really glad you referenced that UCIPM resource for them.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks. So this is kind of the last call for questions. We haven't received too many more. I wanted to mention we did get a comment question came in that mentioned that our links are broken. So the links on some of the slides are not leading people to the report and resources that they need. So do know that you can go to the Climate Science Alliance Resilient Roots webpage, and from there you'll be able to find the final report, the summary document that I really want to encourage everybody to look at, because it's crop specific and it talks about the different impacts of climate change. So definitely go. And then we also have those resources linked on our Climate Change Consortium webpage at CDFA. And I also want to encourage you to go there, because we're going to be posting this video there, and we also are going to open a public comment period for folks to make comments on the report and process that we went through with this project. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Michael. He's going to give some more details about that public comment period. Thanks. Thank you to our panel so much. It was great.
Thank you for having me.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, this is Michael again. Here we are. Just a quick word about the links. There were a few copies of the link that didn't seem to work, particularly for the Climate Science Alliance. There has to be a dash between 2020 and Consortium, like you see at the bottom of this slide. So in parting, we'd like to invite more feedback on ideas that you may have regarding the path forward for climate change adaptation in Southern California and agriculture. If you choose, you can follow the questions here in order to give feedback on climate adaptation strategies. That is the substance and not the process of what we've been doing here. These are basically simplifications of questions which are found in the draft, or rather in the report on that website that we were referring to of the Climate Science Alliance. If you open that up and you go to Appendix 1, there's essentially a list of questions that were addressed in a convening and in individual talks with stakeholders, and there are lists of answers that have been given up until now as further stimulus and food for thought. So we invite you to take a quick, we invite you to take a quick look at the at what can be seen there, and to respond to any of the questions that you see in Appendix 1 that are of interest to you, where you would like to register your ideas and experiences. And then there's another type of feedback on the next slide. So we're also open to feedback on the process that we've just been through, on the formulation of the report and the way that the outreach was conducted. You might also be thinking about ways that we can extend our outreach on this subject more effectively to underserved groups, or you might also be thinking about how the process should be managed from here going forward. For example, how the report and other products produced can be best used to advance the conversation about climate change adaptation. For any of those sorts of public comments that we've been mentioning, the window is open until August 15th. We ask you to submit them via email to the email address that is listed here. The materials, as mentioned before, are found at that website with the 2020-Consortium. And we will look forward to reading those materials. As the further instructions on this and a list of the questions will be available on our own website, the CDFA website, which is the address listed at the bottom. Let me say thank you to all our presenters and commenters. It was a very interesting session, and we appreciate having them on board, not just once, but twice to assist us in extending these results. And thanks to all you listeners for coming out.